Welcome to the Introverted Servant Leader podcast, a show dedicated to empowering purpose-driven women in corporate leadership to amplify their impact and influence. I'm your host, Sharissa Sebastian Deppen, a leadership and executive coach with over a decade of experience who guides introspective leaders in harmonizing personal aspirations with professional success. In each episode, we'll have thoughtful conversations about leadership, making decisions, embracing growth, and maintaining work-life balance while leading with quiet strength. We're so glad you could join us. Let's redefine leadership together. Today, we're talking about how to gain influence. So in our last episode, I talked about trust and what are some of the foundational building blocks of building trust. So if you haven't listened to that, I really highly recommend that you take a little bit of time to go back and listen to that episode as well. And to be honest with you, when I was preparing for these episodes and the topic and the content, I initially put trust and influence together. But I realized that there's so much that I want to share with you that it makes more sense to separate these topics. So again, if you want to go back and listen to the previous episode, which is all about trust, I invite you to do that. But for today, let's focus more on gaining influence. So let's start by talking about why this is important. One of our deepest needs is to matter, to feel like we're making a difference. That's why influence is so important. So let's start by defining what influence is. Webster's dictionary defines it as to affect or alter by indirect or intangible means. So what do we need to know about this, right? What do we need to know about this topic of influence? Now that we've defined what that is, the next thing to keep in mind is that you have to be clear on the type of leader that you want to be. What are your values? How well are you aligning your decisions and the daily choices that you make with your values? Being authentic, being as transparent as you can be, and leading by example. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. And this is when things really started to shift for me. When I started to go more from feeling like I was at the effect of my career and I was really struggling and just burning out and not sure why things were not aligning. One of the things that my coach at the time really helped me to figure out is what is important to me? What type of person do I want to be? And what is it about who I am as a person and at my core that is going to help me to gain this influence and to just show up in a way that is really clear and really authentic and being aligned with my values? As an example of that, one of the decisions that I made at the time, because I really started to take a very close look at what my values were so I could be better at making sure that every decision I make when it comes to boundaries or when it comes to how I'm showing up and things like that, really aligned with my core values. And one of my core values at the time, and still is family. And so I was a single mom at the time when I went through this process. And of course, being a single mom, one of my most biggest priorities and highest values was family, meaning it was my daughter. I wanted to make sure that my work was not going to negatively impact her. And so what I had to do was set really clear boundaries on what I could do and was available to do when it comes to work and how I show up and how I want to have influence, and not kind of push myself too hard at the sacrifice of spending time with her and being that role model, being that influential person that I wanted to be, while at the same time keeping in mind that I am modeling my behavior, right? So I wanted to be not just a role model for her, but I also recognize that as a leader, when I show up, that I'm influencing, whether I like it or not, I'm influencing people to some degree, around me, especially the people that I have direct, I have my direct reports, and those people that are reporting to me, of course, I have, a big amount of influence. So I wanted to make sure that I'm leading by example at all times. So the next thing I want to chat about is these values-based decisions. So I touched on this for just a second, right? So you want to be very clear on what your values are. So that means you start by defining what those are for you. What are the things in your life? And by values, I mean it's very simply the things that are really important to you. So my example for what my values are, and these are something that I've kept front and center for many years, since I've done this exercise. A lot of my values happen to start with the word if. So my very first value is my faith. And so I'm always looking at how I'm showing up, who I'm becoming, how I'm making decisions through the lens of my faith and, what God tells me and who I am and how I can live in that confidence. And that's the place for me that my true authenticity is really going to shine. And that's how I can be influential. So for me, again, faith is the first value. Then there's friends and family. And then the next is fun. And so I always want to make sure that as I'm making decisions of how I lead my team, how I, coach my clients, all of these different things, I'm going to infuse and incorporate fun and authenticity into who I am so that as I communicate with them and as I, share information or whatever it is, that I'm having the ability to positively influence them in some way. So that's something to consider as well. You need to start by really looking at what are the things that are important to me? Who do I want to be known as, right? So what is the type of person that I need to become so that I am the best version of myself when I show up? Because a lot of influence is going to be gained from that clarity, the authenticity, working in integrity, so making sure that, as you make these decisions, they're very much aligned with your values and who you are. And so that's the other thing that I want to mention to you. So there are many other factors that go into being influential. And I walk my clients through a step-by-step proven process to master influential leadership in my 8-week program called the Leadership Mastery Alliance Mastermind. More on that to come. But for now, as we wrap up, just know that I'm rooting for you and you've got this. If you love this episode and want more, I invite you to find out more about my exclusive high-level 8-week mastermind for introverted servant leaders who are women in corporate leadership. You can find out more by going to leadershipmasteryalliance.com/LMA. The link will be in the show notes below. Use code podcast for a massive discount just for listening today. That's all for this episode of the Introverted Servant Leader podcast. I hope you found value in our discussion around leadership for introverted servant-hearted women thriving in the corporate space. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a review, subscribed to the show, and shared it with fellow purpose-driven leaders. Your reviews and shares help amplify the influence of introverted leaders worldwide. I look forward to connecting further on the next episode as we continue to redefine wise, compassionate leadership together. Until then, lead with grace, embrace your strength, and remember, your quiet leadership is a force that shapes the world. Take care and stay inspired.